one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you read our mission statement?
Marshall Public Schools develops the potential of each learner for success in a changing world.
Thank you. We have approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Any additions to the agenda? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Tiger Spotlight.
We'd like to have Christian Witherow come up to the front, and Mr. Chapman, if you could meet him out there with the Tiger Spotlight certificate. I'd like to recognize Christian, who's a Marshall Middle School teacher. Recently, because of a reaction to some medicine, a student developed weak muscles and now has to use a wheelchair until they get their strength back. Christian showed up at this student's house with some wood and supplies to help build a ramp for their house. Sounds like something that he would just decide to do on his own because the parents did not know that he was going to show up, nor did they ask him to do that. It may have only taken a couple hours, but Christian and the students' friends finished building the ramp, and certainly that's been very helpful to the family who is new to Marshall. So at this meeting, we'd like to recognize this act of kindness as part of our Tiger Spotlight and Christian Witherow. Thank you.
Good job, Christian.
Thanks, Christian.
Public forum. Anybody in the public like to approach the board? Now's your time. Moving on to our presentations. Taher?
We have with us this evening Mark Broderson, Melanie Worth, and Lori Froon from Taher Food Service. We welcome them. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to come and visit tonight for just a few minutes. I normally like to talk about food and all the wonderful things that are going on in the lunch program, but tonight we really are reserving our conversation for the negative balances. Back in August, we obviously shared some difficult news in terms of where the account balances were, and the administration asked us to update the board on our progress. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about that so you get a sense as to what's happened since August and where we are now. So just a little bit about the discovery and background. All districts are supposed to have a policy for the negative lunch account balances, and Marshall Public Schools does have one of those. There's been a lot of focus in the last few years about a couple of things in the national media that had to do with a school district taking a tray of food away. There was one specifically in the state of Idaho. It was an elementary school, and obviously it went right to CNN. And there was a lot of districts that were concerned about could that happen with us, and if so, how do you get to that? Fortunately, we don't have any of those kinds of issues to worry about. Tricia, could you just turn to the first Excel spreadsheet that has I don't know which one it's called, but while she's getting that up, let me just talk a little bit about it. Back in 2010, the negative balances were just under $10,000 in a year. When the slide comes up, you'll see it, and you might have it in front of you as well. In 2011, it grew to 13, so it grew by about $3,000. In 2012, it was at $12,800. 2013, it was at $15,900, and then in 2014, it was $18,200. It roughly had averaged about $14,000 a year, and that really, we didn't go back and drill into what happened between 2010 and in the past. We certainly can try to do that. I'd have to work with Mr. Lamprick and his team to be able to get that. But you can sort of see kind of the trend of what has been happening. And as you can tell, there's been a little bit of a steady growth in the negative lunch account balances. I talked about the USDA in terms of there has been an emphasis on trying to make sure that all students eat, regardless of their ability to pay. And that has kind of a double-edged sword. I think it's admirable in the fact that we want all students to eat, but we also want the students that are capable of paying to pay and do so in a manner where they keep a positive balance as opposed to a negative. There's a lot of decisions that are made, and rightfully so, in communities where the principals have a great deal of responsibility for what happens in their buildings, and that includes the fact that they want students to eat. And so, we've honored that over the years, and that's okay and appropriate. But at the same time, we also have to be good stewards about the fact that the people who are able to pay can do that, and they can do it on a frequent basis. So the public schools here, we follow the law. We try to accommodate the local needs as much as what we can. We do have the ability to reach out to specific families that might be in need or have some circumstance that may not be known either by the fact that they haven't filled out a free or reduced application or something else. And then in those rare cases, we've had to send some folks to collection just because we still have to be good stewards of the money that's provided to us. In 2015 then, I think that might be just up a little bit, the number reached 29,109, or almost 110,000, which you can tell from the end of 2014, June 30th of 2014, it was at 18,000, and in June 30th of 2015, it was 29,000. That rise really was unprecedented. It obviously was not something that you can see the trend over the past several years, and obviously as a district, you asked us as your food service provider to come up with a discernible plan to try to reduce and eliminate that. So what we did is we came to you in August and talked about it. We developed a plan on September 18th that included some additional colleagues. Lori Froon, obviously our local food service director, and then I asked one of our specialists on our team, Melanie Worth, who is with us tonight, to come out to Marshall and specifically try to figure out how we were going to try to change some of this. So our plan included that we would have an action plan that would actually reach out to these families and do it in a variety of ways. Now, prior to that, we always sent either email notifications to the families that were affected by the email addresses that were on record. We also made occasional phone calls. And so we've really ramped up on that. We're now making personal phone calls almost on a daily basis. And I think Lori today, Carrie made, it was 5 pages worth, so it was how many families did she touch? Okay, so any family balance that was a negative 25 or more received a phone call today from the food service department. And then in some cases, we asked the district administration to get involved because there might have been some circumstances that were out of a variety of controls that we asked for their help. We also, I thought, and Tricia, maybe you can clarify this for me, I thought we did the Blackboard Connect, but Lori said that wasn't up and running. We haven't started that. Okay. Is that something that we're still going to be able to do? Okay. So, and that's an automated phone system, as I understand it, correct? Right. All right. And then we're also mailing. We send out mail letters on a weekly basis. We've posted signage at all of our point of sale terminals. We've discontinued the practice of if they have a negative balance or they owe us that they cannot make a la carte purchases. They could still make a meal purchase, but not an a la carte purchase. And then we did work on the district meal charging policy, which I believe you're going to visit with at some point. I don't know. It's in the packet, I believe,
It's
but
in
I
the
don't.
packet, yeah.
So you may read it tonight, because there were some language things that were changed, and then in some cases we did still send some to collections. Melanie came out and made a couple of trips, and then we continue. So when you look at the next, if you want to just move it down a little bit. So back in June 30th, we had 29,110. On the 1st of September, it dropped to 21,800. Now, some of you might ask, well, why did it drop so quickly? Part of it is the fact that people owed money, and they paid before the start of the school year, so we received quite a few of the additional funds. We did the next test on October 20th, and the balance was 19. So again, we were lowering it. We did the next test on the 17th of November, and it was 18,000. So again, we were trending in the right direction. And then the last test, which we did last week on the 14th of December, it spiked just slightly. Now, some of that has to do with seasonality in terms of just the time of the year. If you look at it from June 30th to the 14th of December, we've eliminated $9,657 of the debt that was owed, and that's a significant change. To actually have a 33% improvement over that short time period is very significant. And we really owe that to Lori and Carrie and Melanie for being diligent about going in and doing that. The balance of what I want to share with you is what do we do going forward, because we still have a balance of 19,000. I'm going to ask Mel and Lori in just a minute to talk about how that breaks down, because I want you to see where the balances are between the various paid, free, and reduced categories, and you might be surprised to see some of that data. We will continue to have our ongoing discussions with all affected families, and we will do so in a thoughtful and appropriate and professional manner. We will always reach out to everyone, and we will acknowledge the circumstance that they provide to us in a dignified fashion. If they're allowed to make, or if they have the ability to make a payment plan, we will do that. We just don't demand that they pay us up front right off the bat, because in some instances they may not be able to do that. But if they can make some overture to start to make payment on it, we will do that. We will consider sending some new families to collection, and we will do that in a thoughtful manner, but we won't do that without the approval of the administration. So be rest assured that we will talk with the administration before we go ahead and make that step. We are looking at freezing all paid lunch accounts to do a deeper dive in accordance with the policy. Now, what does that mean? That would mean that every every paid student in the families, if they owed money, maybe frozen in the respect that they could not use their lunch ID. Now, that has a lot of implications, but if we're going to at least set the tone that we are going to be serious, more serious about trying to collect on these bad debts, we have to do that. Our dive was not as deep as what I just inferred, because obviously there are some consequences, and recognize that there are some students, and I think, did we have one or two students where I think we froze the paid and they were in the upper level, right? They were at the high school, but we had students that were in the lower grades still eating because it was in the same family unit. And some of that dynamic really creates some challenges, both for food service as well as the school and the building principals, because there are families that are in a circumstance that might be unique, and if we were to do that, and it would affect all of them, we might have some challenges ahead of us. I share that with you because if we're going to get to zero, we can't just make these small unilateral kinds of efforts. We have to obviously drill a lot deeper than that. Review the meal charge policy. I've made some recommendations to the school about some language. I put some tighter language in there, and I think that's been accepted, or at least it's been accepted in the draft form, and hopefully that will become part of the policy. And part of that is going to have to be is when do we really kick that in so that we enforce it to the letter of the statement, okay? Because obviously we didn't get into this situation overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. There has to be a time period that the community is allowed to accept some of this new language and some of the circumstance, so that if their child does come to school and they were able to eat before and they owed money, and all of a sudden they come home and the child says, I wasn't able to eat lunch, that they understand that there will be a time period before we actually put that in force. The next one would be is that if we send some other people to collections, and then adding some clerical time, some additional clerical time, because if you look, we still are owed $19,000. So do we appropriate some more clerical time in addition to what's already being done on how we can capture it? Today was a little unique in the fact that we made as many phone calls as we did, because the individual who does that, Carrie, was able to devote most of her day to doing just that function, and it takes an awful lot of time to be able to dial all those phones and try to reach out to people and have a conversation and have the information in front of them to be able to do that. Based on the results and the size of the negative balance in March, so if I fast forward to March, okay, and say it's March 2016, if the balance looks the same as it does right now, we may have to have another conversation. In other words, that if we haven't improved it anymore or we haven't captured it anymore, then we may have to do something in addition to that. There might be a way that we can use some other technologies that we're currently not doing. So we're already doing phone calls, we're already doing emails, we're already doing letters, and I believe, are there conversations at the secondary level with the point of sale people to the student as they go through the line? Yeah. So those are the flavors, if you will, of what we're trying to do. There might be something else that we can try. And then consider a new policy on collections, which is triggered at the end of the school year. So in other words, the policy that you're looking at now, we have to determine how quickly we're going to enforce it to the letter. And then do we come back and say, okay, now before the start of the school year, do we communicate something in a manner that says that is the policy, we are following it to the letter, and this is the consequence that happens in the event that the money is not paid or that your balance is not kept positive. So that's a broad stroke of where we are. I'm really pleased of the ground that we've made. I would love to stand before you tonight just before the holidays and say that that number is 0, but it's not. And now what I'd like to do is, Mel, could you talk a little bit about the breakdown, and Mel, you may have to come up here if you don't mind, about the numbers in terms of paid, free, and reduced, and the percentage of the negative balance and how it affects those classifications of meals.
So the paid, free, and reduced, we have about 50% of our enrollment, 58% is paid, and the other percentage is free and reduced. So approximately half of our debt is from free and reduced patrons, which we're most likely not going to get that money back because they're free and reduced for a reason. They either acquired that debt from before they were enrolled into the program, or maybe sometimes some kids slipped through the system where a new kindergartner came in and that kid the family just assumed they were free and reduced like the rest of the kids, but weren't. So that is kind of alarming that almost half of it is from free and reduced, and the other half is, you would expect all of it to be coming from the paid parties. So that is one, probably not going to get half, what's the percent? 47% is paid. The other 53 is unpaid.
So if they're in the free category,
Yep.
how do they even get balanced?
They were either accruing a balance before they were considered free. Maybe they didn't fill out the paperwork. I know this school year, I don't know about the past, but they did a really good job of making sure that they captured all of those families before school even started. So these were from years past. Some of these, the income or the
Yeah, I would say a lot of that balance is probably from
years past. Yeah, this year I was here in early September and I caught a few that had a few kindergartners on there that were still full paid status, but everyone else in the family was free. That I only caught a couple of them, and Lori had said in the past that those types of things slipped through the cracks. And this year they did a much better job of making sure that if they qualified, that they filled out the paperwork at open house, I think it was, right, Lori? Before they left, to eliminate this issue in the future.
So they have to fill out for each child, they have to fill out a application for free and reduced, or they just make sure all their kids are on? Okay.
But some people are automatically rolled over from year to year, and if they have a new student that they weren't aware of, then sometimes that's how they kind of slip through the cracks.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So if they had accrued balance, just real quick here, and then they came forward and said, we just didn't fill out the paperwork, right?
Yeah.
So they had this balance. I'm assuming then at that point that we don't really consider that a balance, or do we still consider
Well, we're still considering it a balance. They still have that balance in their account.
Well, let me just clarify that. They would have eaten a meal. They wouldn't have paid for it.
Yep.
It would have been reimbursed as a paid meal because that's how it was classified. So even though they accrued that negative balance, we would still consider it a paid meal until their status changed to either reduced or free. And that balance still remains because it's monies that are technically owed for a meal that was served. And it wasn't paid for, but we got the reimbursement only at the paid rate, not the full free rate, or reduced.
You can't go back once.
That's what I was saying. You
You
can't
can't
go
go
back
back and
and
get
recategorize.
reimbursed for a free one. Yeah.
Against the law, you know.
It would be wonderful if we could.
Yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, and really we're pretty good at it in terms of once a student is enrolled, that free and reduced application is there, and then their status is determined, and we get it into the system right away. I mean, in a perfect world,
quick.
they come in at 8 o'clock, by the time they eat at 11, they
They're
should
in
be
there.
classified correctly. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work just that way.
So of the unpaid balance, what percentage of it is faculty and staff?
It's
Not all students, is it?
Document with that. We did look at that. It's a small amount. isn't
That's,
it?
yeah, that's a small
It's a
amount.
small amount.
That
I don't know
has
that we
been-
put it on there.
No, I didn't.
Here, yeah. We do have it. We can provide that for you. You know what? It might have been in one of the earlier communications that we had back in September.
I don't understand how that happens.
Our-
Yeah.
how-
Faculty and staff, how that would happen.
How they would have a negative balance as well. Just the fact that they don't consume a meal or were allowed to eat.
Right, and I get that, but then why isn't it taken out of their paycheck?
Oh, okay. Well, that would actually be something that we would probably have to interface with. Because right now it's a closed system, meaning that, you know.
What's
you either
the
write a
Taher-
check,
yeah,
you-
okay.
you
It's
pay
contracted.
cash, or you go online, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this pretty typical that in other school districts, that half of the negative balance would be free and reduced?
You know, Matt, it's interesting because I was a little surprised about that percentage that was almost half. I'm going back into some of our data now with some of the other sites that we have. I think it's a little bit high, but, you know, I'll go back and try to prove that for you. It's not uncommon to have negative balances. You know, that,
Oh, sure.
It's the reality of what goes on. There's a lot of circumstances as to why we get to that point. The most difficult challenge that we will have as supervisors and managers is if we enforce the policy to the letter, we'll have to change an entire community's way of looking at that process. And we will have some pushback because it is difficult for some families to adjust to that. Others, no, they'll respond. And we've been fortunate enough to already cut the balance to the degree that we have by making personal phone calls and asking them to pay. You know? So that'll really be the
An unpaid account doesn't follow a family, though, does it? So let's say they come from a district that uses Taher and they move to Marshall. That
They're
doesn't.
completely separate. So if
Okay.
they were new families to the Marshall community, they would start at zero.
Okay.
With fresh starts. So, even though they could have been, let's say, at River Falls,
Yeah.
which we serve as well. So,
Okay.
Is your free and reduced price the same as your reimbursement, free and reduced the same as non-free and reduced?
You mean like paid? Well,
Correct.
paid is still reimbursed. The highest level is free, and we get $3, and I should have this memorized.
I think last time it was, when we looked at that, the free and reduced, actually, there's a better payback on that than there is on
On
what
full
we charge.
page, right?
Okay.
Mark, do we have families in here that are no longer have kids in the district, so they're still part of that balance? Or
Good question. Yes. Do we know how many? Yeah, we'll get it to Mr. Lambert, and we can share that with you. Yeah.
So this is my
I think
question
it's a
for
small-
you.
It might be a
Some-
small percentage.
At some point, do we have a vehicle to write those off and absorb that loss?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we would send it to collections. That would be,
That would be the final.
That would be
in other
the-
words, the final.
yeah.
Today we received about $500 from collections. About $350. So we are receiving some. You know, we don't get. You know, we capture half.
You're still having to write off.
you still have to write it off, and
That's
it's an expense.
50% of it will always be. Whatever we send to collections, we recognize 50% of it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, do we make a decision administratively, let's say at the end of this school year, and I think we have to have a conversation about that to see if we're going to, what are we going to write off, and how much is that? And that's really in conjunction with a tougher policy that has some more teeth in it, I guess.
Have we had any individual meetings with families at this point, or has it been more, I've talked to them on the phone or send an email.
Like a personal meeting, you mean? Like
Yeah,
they actually came
yep,
in?
yep.
Is that what you were?
Yep, I was just wondering if
Yeah,
we've
having a
actually had
personal- right.
meetings with the families to discuss it and then see if there's a plan around that.
You know, in some rare circumstances, and I know our principals are behind me, so they'll probably pay attention to what I'm about to say, but, you know, because they have other things that they're trying to accomplish within the district, but they also know the families. And so, unfortunately, when we become bill collectors, and no one likes to be a bill collector, and ask for reimbursement, that there might be some instances where we have to have some of their help as well, or they get us in front of some people and have people come in and visit with us. Yeah. We generally don't go to a home, but if they could come to a neutral site within the district, and it's appropriate, and then we can discuss it, that's certainly appropriate.
Well, we ask families to come and discuss a lot of different things probably.
And maybe we need to get
how their students are doing and stuff.
Sure.
I would think this might be one of those that we,
We reach out to them at that
Yeah, we
point,
would
or at least
provide
make ourselves available for them to visit with us. Yes, we can do that.
think face-to-face meetings could maybe get you a little further along than
Very powerful. Yes.
emails.
The phone calls are, I think, a lot more productive than an email.
Or a letter.
If you get them.
Yeah.
I think that's the big key is, if you're calling 100 people, how many are you getting?
Right.
And I'm going to guess that the percentage is pretty low, especially if you call during the day.
We do log the phone calls, so, you know, we'll go back and repeat that if we don't reach them. We're trying to look at different times of the day to do that. And the same group of people that are actually doing the phone calls right now are working during the day, so they're working from 6 to 4 on a regular basis. And then to have them, let's say, call at night, which we can do, we may have to appropriate some different folks to be able to help us with that.
I think we'll have something for you by March.
Good.
Without a problem.
Great.
We'll put it on our agendas.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate
You
it.
guys have a nice Christmas.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Our next presentation, standard-based grading. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. I brought more friends with me.
Powerful, too. Hours.
All right. Well, we are here to talk about standards-based learning and grading and where we're at this year, 2015-16, at each building. These are the items that we're going to talk about today. We had standards-based committees at every level as we've progressed through the buildings with standards-based learning and grading. 2 years ago, so 2013-14, we had a K through 4 committee, and so those members are listed there for Parkside. West Side, these are the members that were on that committee at that time, but that committee is still in existence and is still working towards what we're working on at that building. The middle school committee was put together last year and did the research and identified things that would work at the middle school level and is still functioning and working as we go through the process. And then the high school committee was just developed this year, and we're at that research and looking at standards-based and what we can do at the high school with those components that will be successful at that level. And I know that we've talked about this before, but I thought it was probably a good idea to do a refresher about what is standards-based learning and grading. And I always will use SBL or SBG, so I might not always say all of that, but just know that I'm talking about the same thing. So standards-based learning is a system that provides an accurate analysis of what a student knows is able to do in regards to identified standards. And when we say identified standards, those are essential standards that our PLC has worked to develop, that these are the standards that each student needs to know at a certain grade level or in a certain content area before they move on to that next level. It's also aimed at providing more accurate communication to students, parents, and other teachers in regards to what a student knows and is able to do. And for example, let's say we have a second grade student who we have identified as lacking in one of our essential standards by the report card. A teacher can see that. So when they arrive at the next grade level, they can see on the report card that that student did not master that concept. And so that teachers are going to have to spend some time going back and reteaching that concept if we want them to move forward. Gradebooks are more accurate portrayal of what a student knows and is able to do. Right now, we could look at 3 different teachers' gradebooks, and they may have provided Bs for a student. And what does that actually mean? Does that mean that they did a lot of extra credit work? Does that mean they did all their homework? Does that mean they do well on tests or they don't do well on tests? So by going to the standards-based grading, we're able to tell more accurately about what a student is able to do when looking at the gradebook. Behavior, attitude, and participation are separate from the content grade. We know that these are very important qualities for a student to be successful, but we don't want that grade to get mixed up with those items. We want to be able to separate them out so we know that a student can perform a standard, yet we can also identify whether their behavior is appropriate, if their attitude is good, and whether they're participating in class. And so every level has that slightly different. K4 calls it your skills for success. The middle school calls it the Tiger traits. And so there are rubrics developed that help teachers identify, what their score is based on their behavior, their effort, and participation. Homework, or what we now call practice, is not calculated as part of the academic grade. We want students to feel like they can take risks when they're doing their homework. And if you go back to a time when you were learning a new skill, how many of us were able to master that immediately? Not very many of us. Not me anyways. So you have to be able to practice something before you get good at it. And so we want kids to feel safe in that process, and that's why this change. And this is a big one, and this is one that a lot of people struggle with. Well, how will my students have the motivation to do homework if it's not part of their grade? I think kids will become very quickly realize that doing the practice is going to help them do better at mastering that skill or concept that the teacher is trying to teach. And we have things in place that if homework isn't getting done, that we're still going to have you work on that. There's no, okay, you're not doing your homework, you're going to get a 0. We're going to keep bringing you back in until you finish that homework. So, and every building is a little bit different on how they handle that. But again, that it's practice. We're trying to get kids to where we need them to be by practicing and not punishing them for not doing a good job the first time they try a new skill. Then the big thing about standards-based learning and grading is that if a student fails to demonstrate mastery on the first assessment, we're going to provide an opportunity to reteach and reassess. And that, again, is handled differently at every building, but we should have something built into the school day, a systematic approach where that can happen. We understand that it's not going to happen if we don't provide that systematically because teachers just don't have time to reteach all the time and reassess all the time. So there's usually also, especially at the upper levels, where they have to do some work to show that they're ready to reassess. And again, at K4, we have our win time. At middle school, they're incorporating some new time. Is that called reteach time, Mary Kay? A reteach schedule. And at the high school, we have that hour lunch where those are opportunities where they can do that. There are other times that may work too for teachers, but we're trying to find systematic approaches to this. And we're still working out all the bugs. We don't have this mastered. It's a work in progress. So why should we make this change? Because we all know that change is hard, and we've all are very accustomed to the 0 to 100% scale that has been in existence for years. So why would we want to make this change? And again, we feel that this is just a better way to communicate to parents and students, and also the teachers that are going to have those students moving forward, about what they know and can do based on our essential standards. That is huge, because right now if a student comes into my class and they have a B, I'm not sure where their deficits are, and I'm going to have to work hard to figure those out. Whereas if we're using this system, it's going to be helpful. For parents, again, same kind of thing. My student may get a C in class. That doesn't tell me which standards they're able to do and which ones they're not. So it's, again, that communication tool. We feel that there's a lot of research that supports this, and we're trying to provide better consistency and reliability in grades across classrooms. And as I mentioned before, we're really focusing on the essential standards, so we're not asking that every teacher reteach every standard that's out there. We've identified those essentials that we know are critical for our students as they move forward. So those are the ones that we're going to keep coming back to until our kids have mastered those. We also understand at some point we have to cut that off and know that we have to keep moving forward, but as long as a kid is willing to make the effort, I would think that most of our teachers would do that as well. But at grading periods, so at the high school level, for example, you'd have to say about a week out, our reassessment opportunities are ending because I need to get my grades done. So there's still a lot of things to talk about for that as well. With standards-based learning, the focus is on learning as opposed to teaching. So, and also instead of my grade. So a student would no longer ask a teacher, how do I improve my grade? They should be asking, how do I improve my learning? And then reassessing allows students extended opportunities. We know that not all students learn at the same rate, and so this gives those students the opportunity who learn at a slower rate to know that we're going to keep coming back to you. We're not going to give up on you. We're going to keep coming at you until you get this concept mastered. Now I'm turning it over to the building principals.
Parkside, so we're going to kind of talk about each of those things that are related to.
So committee work, implementation, and evaluation. As Amanda mentioned, a couple of years ago, we started our committee that was K through 4, both Parkside and Westside. And we had already had a group of kindergarten teachers who had piloted standard-based grading for some time. And so the natural progression then was for the entire kindergarten group to pilot the program or the practice. And then the next year we went into first grade, and now last year was our full year for K through 2. It's really hard to just pick out a grade level or a couple of teachers. It really went probably more quickly than what we had anticipated, K through 2. And so this is our second year that we're into using the grading piece of it. As Amanda mentioned, that standards-based is encompasses a lot. Grading is just one little piece of it, but really it also helps us focus on the standards-based learning part of that and not just the grade that you receive in the end, but assuring that we're focusing on the standards and that we are focusing on the learning and not just the teaching. And so I'm always reminded of a little cartoon that says, hey, I taught my dog how to whistle. And so they're like, well, let me see it. Well, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. And so that's what I always think about when I think about standards-based learning, is that we're always thinking about the learning. Is the learning taking place? And if it's not, what do we need to do? Do we need to reteach? Do we need to come at it with a different approach, or what do we need to do? And so we are at that point where we're starting to talk about, what our report card looks like, what more support do we need, all of those kinds of things. So that's where Parkside is at.
So before you go, what are some of the standards that they have to meet to go from kindergarten to first to second?
Are there? I'm sorry. Say that again.
You used to be able to get 90% to move to the next grade. Now there are certain standards they have to meet. What is the standard from kindergarten to first that they have to meet?
Kindergarten, first, and second, we don't hold back a lot of students per se, but there's still that conversation with the parents and with the teacher. If we see that a student is really struggling with, half or more of those essential skills, then we would have that conversation about would it be beneficial to hold them back. Once they get into first and second grade, there's really a lot of research to say that that isn't good practice. So primarily those conversations take place in kindergarten.
My question was, I wanted to know specific
standards that they have to meet.
That standards they have to meet.
Right.
They're all listed right there.
But on your reteaching, what's your percentage of that you have to reteach? Is there a lot that you have to reteach then?
It really varies. But I would say that the 3, 2, and 1. So what happens is they teach a skill or a concept, and then they're given an assessment. And there's a rubric that the teachers have developed to say, this is what mastery looks like, or this is what proficiency looks like. This would say that they're close, and this would say that, they've got quite a bit more work to do. And so the teachers together develop that rubric to say whether or not that student has demonstrated proficiency in that standard. And so they would do that at least 3 times in order to get a 3 on the report card. So a 3 means that, yep, you've got it, you're ready to move on. A 2 means you're close, you're progressing, you're making progress towards, and a 1 would mean that, we've got a lot more work to do. So when you're still at that 1 is when we're going to be looking at other supports, reteaching, those types of things.
How's the education of the parents on that?
When we started with our pilot 2 years ago, we had a group of parents who also came in and provided feedback. We had a brochure last year when we first started the new report card, just kind of the basics of standards-based grading and learning and what it means and what it looks like, and just opportunities for parents to ask questions. And, really for kindergarten, it really wasn't a huge shift. Kindergarten has always kind of used a similar model of that. And so first and second really wasn't too much of a stretch. I do think when you start getting up into the upper grades is when it's a little bit more difficult for parents to understand that, or not to understand, but to accept that.
So if you've got a student who's mastered all of it, do they get to move up right away? Or do they have to wait till the end of the school year and now they're bored?
Not usually, just because of how school is structured. But certainly that is a challenge to how do we, when a student already has, developed or has already demonstrated proficiency, how do we keep them engaged? And so a lot of times if it's during a win time, we try to enrich that skill or concept. So they might be reading at a high enough level where maybe we're going to challenge them with a little bit more or a little bit harder text, or an opportunity, again, to enrich that skill or concept.
I feel like, aren't we already doing that? I mean, if kids don't get what's going on, aren't we already trying to reteach them? And if they're already excelling at it, sorry, Kurt, you weren't the bad one, but
it's hard not to talk with your hands.
If they're excelling at it, then we're giving them extra stuff to do. Isn't that kind of what we're doing right now?
I think it is what we always kind of have done to a certain extent, but really the focus of standards-based learning is that we're having a better measure of which areas of the student are they doing well on and which areas do they need more practice on, so we can, when we're doing those enrichment activities and those reteach opportunities, we know that we're targeting the right areas for those students. So it's a better measure of maybe doing what we've done better.
And I get it more so in the lower grades because, like I said, in the lower grades you're not getting an A, an A minus, B plus. I struggle at the high school level a lot. But I know we're not that far yet, so I'll just wait.
But also, I kind of understand if it's sort of laid out like you can't go to Algebra 2 or trigonometry till you master Algebra 1. So you have to learn the basis before you get to the next step. I understand that, so we're kind of focusing the whole learning area on that. And then when somebody's struggling and not passing, they can actually see what skills they do not have. So I understand the concept.
This is what the current one looks like, right? So previous to this, what did it look like? Was it just like ESSA's satisfactory, unsatisfactory?
Right. And then it would be more general. So in reading, satisfactory, etc. And they did have it broke down, but it wasn't specified by standard. Rather, it was just more general areas.
Right. Okay, so this gets a little bit more depth. Is that really what kind of we're getting into here? Where you can identify in reading.
Specifically, is it when you're talking about reading and foundational skills, is it that you're not able to identify letters? Do you letter sounds? Is it blending? Is it more specifically, what is it? Is it fluency? Is it comprehension?
Right. And clearly we could have done that too, using the satisfactory, unsatisfactory, if we would have just expanded it to include items like that.
Yes, I think that part of that too goes back to how we come to that grade. So previously, that grade might have included 5 worksheets and maybe some extra credit in there, and so it had a lot of different pieces in order to get that grade. Whereas standards-based learning, it's saying this assessment that specifically was designed to assess this skill, this is how you did on that specific thing. Does that make sense? So rather than including a bunch of pieces into that, it's saying specifically for that skill. So again, as Amanda mentioned, we don't include the effort or the attitudes or the homework and practice and all of that into the grade, but rather specifically that skill. Can you do it, or are you still working towards it?
All right. So at Westside, like Darcy mentioned, this year's our first implementation year. So starting implementation this year. Last year was a lot of research with our team, the leadership team for standards-based learning. Spent a lot of time looking at what does the research say, what's best for kids, and what's going to fit within the framework. How do we want to move forward? We're moving at a little slower pace, just as we started developing what we're going to do. We're just looking at it, how can we do this really well, so it makes the most sense for us. Had some parents in on the committee with the team last year too, and went through and just some feedback from them helped us determine kind of our pacing and what we're going to look at with that. The big thing that's really started with us, the biggest thing that's changed, probably practice in the classroom, is the standards alignments tables. So it's a chart that we've laid out where it has all the learning standards laid out from the Department of Ed, focusing on reading and math to start with. And then after we lay those standards, we lay them out in those I can statements you've heard us talk about for the past probably 10 years. So it's got the standard and it has in that student-friendly terms, the I can statement. Then we laid out what resources do we have, and the grade level teams did that all together as a team. What resources do we have to teach each of those standards? What assessments do we have to measure each of those standards? And what is our pacing that we're going to use? So which month are we going to teach each of those standards in? Then at the PLC meetings, each time they meet, they're talking about what standards have we done, which ones come next, what assessments have we given, and talking as that whole team on those and where they're at with that and how the students are doing. That's how part of with reteaching too, how they're sorting the students into which students are needing reteaching and which teacher is taking which group and that kind of thing. That's where that conversation is taking place. So that standards alignment table, that's really guiding our instructions, putting the teachers very aware of what the standards are and what they need to be teaching. And then the assessments that they have laid out with that are really how they're measuring for each child what they know and what they're able to do. So this year, the implementation phase that we're in, like Darcy mentioned too, the practice activities, the homework, they're not a measure of understanding. They're just used for practice. That's why we're calling it practice activities with the homework pieces. That it's an important part of what we do, but it's not part of the content grade. Still recognizing the behavior, participation, attitude. This is the other thing that's a big change probably for us right now. Those are a very important part of what we do at this age level, but we don't want to keep that separate from the content grade. So I might not focus in class. I might not want to pay attention, or I might have a poor attitude in class, but maybe I really know my material. Like Karen mentioned earlier, talking about this child need enrichment. Maybe that's where it is, but we pull that apart. We can look at those as two separate things. So you're not failing science because you're clashing with a teacher or something like that. So we can look at those independently and have a better picture for each child where they're at with each of those areas. So the grades are really based on assessments, and that's a change for us. It's entirely based on the assessments, and that's there's going to be fewer things in the grade book for a parent to look at the grade book and see what does my child have for grade. There aren't as many things in there because some of those other pieces that have always counted aren't in that section of the grade book anymore. So that's where the assessments become very important then if we're focused on that. So that's why having these common assessments where the grade level teams have developed those for each standard, that we know we have quality assessments and that they're really measuring what we're asking the students to do. That's where the teachers really need to have a very good understanding of what those standards are asking for each one. There's a lot of conversation in the past years, but particularly the last couple of years at Westside when we're really looking at how our students doing. Last year with the continuous improvement ranking we had from the state, that was a push for us too, thinking, okay, well, what are we doing and how are our students doing in each of those areas? So it's been a very good conversation going through this and philosophy of teaching, where are we at and how are we moving forward.
Sure, I can't imagine that attitude came into play in regards to giving the student a grade.
With attitude?
Yeah, if I'm getting a D on an assessment, but I got a great attitude, you don't give me a C or a B.
Attitude, not necessarily, but the
Or vice
participation
versa.
could play into the attitude, and participation sometimes is counted for grades or getting the homework done.
Participation.
Right.
Yeah,
And
they might get some points for participation.
Right.
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 So
Right.
now there's more assessments in addition to the regular tests that they have to do.
No, the assessments are just broken down. So instead of it varies off each subject and each standard area, but maybe rather than a big test, just a big test at the end, we might give it's what we would have called a quiz. So a
Right.
smaller assessment on the standards, and those are the ones that we're measuring.
I'm talking like MCAs and all the absolutely required tests. So now we're getting even more assessments.
No,
How does
no, it's not more. It's just like what I mentioned with some of the things. It's just kind of doing what we've done better, doing it better assessments. So they're
you do 4 assessments as opposed to like a big in the chapter test?
it,
No,
Well,
am I
like,
misunderstanding?
For example, in my Spanish classroom, in the past, I had, oh my gosh, 25, 30 homework assignments in a quarter, and there'd be 10 points for each of those. And if a kid didn't do the assignment, they'd get a second opportunity to finish it. And if they turned it in late, they'd get 5 out of 10. Well, 5 out of 10 is a failing grade. But let's say that kid, then when I gave a quiz on whatever it was, they aced that quiz. And if I'm averaging all those points together, their grade goes down. And my concern really isn't, what I want to know as a teacher and what the parent should want to know. Did that student master that material? Have they developed the skill they need to move on, to do the Spanish that I'm asking them to do right now? And have they mastered it enough that they can use it for the next level of Spanish? So if they get a grade that says an average of 10 points on the quiz was 10 out of 10, but the homework was 5 out of 10, 75%, that really isn't an accurate portrayal of what they can do. They know that material at 100%. So the assessments, we're still doing the assessments, but what's different is I'm not punishing that kid for not doing the homework.
That's kind of why it's weighted. The assessments are weighted a little bit more than the homework. And, like, I guess I'm only thinking of Chase.
But I'd like to counter that. So then my question as a parent, if my child's homework's not being graded and I'm not seeing a grade on a consistent basis, there's less going in the grade book, how do I know that my child is meeting that standard until I have a conference or a conversation with the teacher? How do I know?
That information should still be going in
Yeah,
the grade
it's
book,
still
it's just
going
not
in.
graded.
Yeah.
It's just a no calculation.
So when you look at
Because if you're going to determine a score for participation or effort, you're going to need to keep track of that.
Right.
So a teacher's going to have to go in and look, okay, did this student finish all their homework? That's going to be under your Tiger grades.
Right.
So
And
this
a
was
parent would be able to go in and see.
So I'm still going to report that student didn't complete that assignment or they didn't complete it on time. And when that student assesses and then I say to the student, okay, let's come in for a reteach, or I'm having a conversation with you where we're looking online, you're going to see, oh, you don't have this done, you don't have this done. But they're not failing the class yet. They just have to have some reteaching or they have to complete that practice so they can be assessed. So we can actually know whether or not they've mastered the material.
So last year with a middle schooler, I got lots of M's, and it would just drove me nuts. I'm like, oh, what's he missing now? No, it's not missing, it meets.
Yeah.
So we met it, but I didn't have a conversation. It was difficult to have a conversation. Well, how did you meet it? You know, what did you do to meet that? And I think I kind of went through it knowing it was the first year.
There was 2 people piloting last year, and it was strictly a pilot, but it was at the 8th grade, and it was science and social, and so some of those adjustments were made this next year. But you're right, Bill, that trying to figure out what all of those things are or were, and getting the details aligned to it was difficult for a parent. And some of that has changed, so it does make it a little easier to see and know and understand. And there's a consistency to it, so it's not just 2 people in the whole building doing the standards-based.
I've had a couple conversations with parents, and one of the frustrations is that students now they know that, hey, when I take it the first time, it doesn't count. So I'm going to have multiple opportunities, and that concerns me with what kind of attitude are we creating. It's kind of almost like, I'll get to it the next time, procrastination.
That's addressed in many ways, but I mean, one of the things is that type of student that's lazy and doesn't want to do the work the first time is going to learn very quickly that in order to reassess, there's some reteaching and a lot of work on their part that they have to do before they can reassess. So they're going to learn very quickly that, oh, it's to my benefit to master this material, do it, demonstrate that I know it, and move on, rather than, oh, now I have to go to that academic intervention and spend half of my lunchtime redoing or doing the practices I should have done the first time. So that's a learning process, but they learn very quickly, and that will happen. So,
well, and that's not just a learning process for kids, and they're not necessarily, I have to say, they're not necessarily lazy if they choose to run it that way. They may be pretty intelligent in what their strategy is, but at any rate, I think it's more on our part as the educators in the classroom that we have to set a standard, and they have to be at a particular area in order to get that assessment and to complete that assessment. And if they're not ready for it and they haven't demonstrated that they're ready and they've had some interventions or some practice time before that assessment, they don't get to take it. You know, if they haven't done any of the homework in math for Chapter 7, that says to the teacher they're not ready. I need to sit down and do some things with them so that they can demonstrate that they are ready to do that.
It's kind of a double standard. It's saying, you know what, you don't have to do the homework because
we're not saying
that at all.
Never said they don't have
but I mean,
to do the homework.
it doesn't count. I mean, I know, what the heck, if I turn it in or don't turn it in, I still get to take the assessment.
It's a little bit like basketball practice, Karen, or free throws shooting. You know, if we want all of our kids to be at 90 to 100% on the line out of 10 free throws,
correct.
And some kids are going to take a whole lot longer to get 9 out of 10 on those free throws than others. But the practice is still part of getting to play and participate and to be out there in the actual competition of the grade. So if a student just has no motivation to do that in the early stages, that's when it's our job to find that motivation and to instill that in kids and the inspiration portion of it. But though that information still counts, the coach would still say practice is so much more important than the actual game in a lot of situations. Just like practice of homework or practice of academics is extremely important. And that's part of what we're moving into and part of the conversations that happen in the classrooms. And that it really is very specific to the individual teacher of the content and the grade. And that's part of what we have to take our steps into and to ensure our kids are ready for those things.
What conversations are we having with parents to alleviate some of these concerns and get their feedback to see that it's meeting their needs?
Most of them are grade specific, grade level specific. And that's something that the middle school committee had decided that it was easier to be able to educate parents on those areas if it was at a grade level. So a lot of it is letters going out via Blackboard Connect or their specific connections within those grade level and content areas. And then fast feedback has been out there with regard to conferences.
And I asked that, and I'm kind of in between with the senior high student, just leaving the middle school, so I saw a little bit of it, but I just asked a random question of a few parents. I got some pretty strong feedback that they did not like it or not have a good experience with it. So it concerns me that how much more of that is out there. So are they not having an avenue to express their concern or to get their questions answered?
I guess I believe that they have an avenue. I've had one conversation with a parent that said they didn't like standard space. They had no idea where their child was in the standard space as far as the grading system went. And I said, well, you know, our perspective was that it was more specific, that they could better understand it. And they said, you know, when I talk to my child's friends, then I don't know where my child is in comparison. And that's part of what standard space loses. It's not a comparison process anymore. It's not about the highest achiever or the lowest achiever. It's you compete against yourself, or it's your own practice. So that part of it is lost, you know, as far as an honor roll per se at a middle school level. It's not about, you know, 15 kids are on the A honor roll versus others. So that could be a piece of it. I don't know. And maybe we need to do more monitoring or survey information to parents to see if we can get more feedback. We have 98% of our parents attend the student-led conferences, and the feedback that we got from that was not negative.
with regard to standards-based. And maybe it wasn't far enough in, it was the middle of October.
What I know last year too with the mix, it was confusing
That was
between
very
the two.
confusing.
Yeah. So just so I understand, you're 1 through 3 on your grades.
We have not changed grades still.
Okay, so you're still ABC.
ABC and
Okay, and you're
We're A, B, C, D, and I. So the I is very much about incomplete, just haven't finished either a course or a specific strategy or a standard within that area. So that's what the I signifies. Committee work at the middle school really began with pockets a couple years ago where several middle school people were starting to read information and had attended a couple conferences that had that as a piece, standards-based as a piece. And so we had a couple high flyers, maybe, who were very much interested in a year ago piloting some standards-based. And when they did that, there wasn't a committee that had previously been put together to decide how we were going to run it and what each one of those areas would contain. So then last year, while that 2-person pilot was going on, then we put together the committee of, I think there's about 12 on the committee and very representative of content areas, grade levels, and exploratory enrichment as well at the middle school level. Then this year, we went to the implementation. And so there's just a few pieces within the implementation that make some changes. And Darcy and Jeremy have both referred to several of those changes as far as the grades at Mabee Park. I think West and Middle is pretty well aligned, and we intend to keep it that way so that when kids go from 4th to 5th, there's not a great deal of difficulty in adjustment. Trying to think of any other areas. The homework situation or the practice is one area that we continue to study and monitor. Extra credit is another, and I would just say that extra credit definitely got in the way of knowing what a grade meant previously. And it doesn't now. We know exactly what level a child is performing when it comes to the demonstration at a proficient or mastery level. It's not about how many nights they stayed after school and did good things and tried really hard. Because even though a child might try really hard, doesn't mean that they have a proficient or mastery level. But as a teacher, it's really difficult to give a child an F when they're trying really hard. I don't think it happens very often at all. When they're trying really hard, it's really tough to look at a little person and say, sorry, you earned an F. So with the standards-based, it's more black and white than that. We can still give them credit for their effort and for their participation and for what great little people they are, but it puts it on the line for the next teacher, for other teachers, for their parents, where the deficits are as well. So
if a child is getting ones in half their stuff, do they still pass? Do they still go on to the next grade? And I know, Darcy, you talked about that. Research says you keep passing them. What difference is that?
It's a good question. At the middle school, if they're getting an I in a particular standard, if it's an essential standard and they need more time to learn it, and it's the end of the school year, they've either got summer school in order to demonstrate that or to learn it at a level that is acceptable, or outside of 8th grade, they can stay in a 7th grade math class during an 8th grade exploratory and continue on within the building to be able to get additional time to learn a concept or a standard. So if it's an essential standard in order to go on, they need to get that before going on. So.
Mary, you're still doing grades?
Yes.
Right? Still A through
90, 80, 70, 60, and an I for incomplete. Yes, we are.
Well, I saw it on your thing, so
Okay.
that's why I was asking. So they're I guess, Bill, I'm trying to get to your question.
Last year, I think
last year there wasn't a letter grade.
it was an D for does not meet, or an M for meets, and a
partially
P
meets
for
or
proficient, maybe.
Yeah.
So that is one area that standard-based and DeForest maybe would advocate. There's several different grading ways in standards-based, and that would be one.
The challenge, kind of went to Karen's question earlier with on the elementary level, started the year and 3/4 of them you already met. So what are they doing? You already met those standards at 8th grade at the beginning of the year. So now what's he doing?
Right.
And again, it was a pilot, and I said, well, I trust that if there's an issue.
And that is part of our responsibility as teachers and educators in our system, is that we meet students where they're at. So if we're doing our job, we're doing that pretty consistently. And if a student is already accelerated, we need to continue to challenge them.
So, well, with that question, so how do you, you can challenge them in the classroom, but you know what, I already got what I need, so challenge away, it won't make a difference, because they can't get any better than it. Yeah.
Well, and research would suggest that grades aren't motivators.
Yes
They
and no.
strongly suggest that. So, it's just a
Conversation with parents about the grades.
It's another piece, right. And that's another piece of the whole puzzle. And there isn't going to be anything perfect or easy about this process. In fact, I think most of us would go, maybe we need a raise to be able to get this thing through. But it's been really hard work. It's arduous, it's tenuous, it's controversial at different places and locations and with different staff people. Is it the right thing for kids, and is it the right thing for parents? I think it is, or I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be an advocate of it. But is it easy? Is this something we want to do to punish kids or parents or our staff? Heck no. We want things to be accurate and in the best interest of kids and best practices. And it's going to take a lot of hard work. There's going to be a lot of glitches. And the system that we have previously worked under has been the system for the last 125 years. How long is it going to take us to decide to move on that? Another 125, or are we going to make some movement for our kids? And these are still baby steps. This is just a reporting system so that you understand better what their standards are, what we're trying to achieve with kids. Our premise when we walk into the classroom is to take a standard and to teach it. So why wouldn't we report the same way? We're teaching a standard. Why don't we tell Mr. Kieran how his kids are doing on that standard? Not whether or not they participated or tried really hard or did all of the homework leading up to it, but they couldn't master the standard. We teach the standard, so let's reflect that in what we give back to parents and kids.
So with the pilots last year, the outcomes, how did they compare to the year before doing things the old way, reporting things the old way? Was there an improvement in the student outcomes? Again, we got to go look at testing. But
I need to better understand your question.
So we had a pilot on how we reported on two classes. Were the student outcomes, their performance at the end of those classes, was there a noticeable measurement?
I think if you talk to Ms. Carpenter or Ms. Peterson with a D, they'd both say that the outcomes were better. And if you take a look at MCA scores at the 8th grade within that area, you would say scores have increased substantially within that category. Both Ms. Carpenter and Ms. Peterson would say, I will not do it that way ever again. And I think Ms. Grunager would be able to confirm that one. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yep.
why. That's why we talked about.
And that is a significant challenge, is the grade book and how campus reports and doesn't report. So,
But I would agree. I heard the same things from Sandy and Mona, but their student participation in how they worked changed because they changed how they were teaching.
Well, and then we have to watch that class because that class has been, all the way through, it's been a high-performing class. So it'll be interesting to see if it's sustained in subsequent classes.
I was really just going to say ditto when I came up here because I felt like everything was said, but I'm going to remove myself.
So at the secondary level this year, we are just starting kind of our research into standards-based, looking at it in terms of what does that look like at a high school, who's doing it at a high school, what do our stakeholders and colleges and universities, what do they know about it, how would this affect our students? And that's really where a lot of the discussion within our committee has been this year. It's also led us to have some conversations with regards to some of our philosophies. What are our philosophies on things such as how much of a grade should count for assessments versus other assignments, projects, homework? How do we handle late work? How do we handle zeros? How do we handle if a student cheats on an assignment, if let's say it's a paper? Do we just put a 0 in there and let them off the hook, or do we hold them accountable and make them go back and redo that and hold them accountable? That's where our discussions so far have really focused. Our task as a committee is to bring forth some recommendations to our full faculty for consideration and discussion in the 16-17 school year, and look at what are some areas that we want to implement. Then in 17-18, possibly a pilot, and 18-19 implementation, and certainly have done the job long enough to know that that's 3 years out and things could change. But one of the things that I'm looking forward to is in January, standards-based grading and learning is a focus of those school districts that are in the FLY. And even though it's our final year here in January, we'll be meeting. I'll get an opportunity to meet with other high school principals from those districts, and I'm curious to hear what are they doing. And there's going to be some that are going to be right out there on that leading edge, and then there's going to be some that are going to be resistors, and it'll just be good to hear what are other people doing, what are they hearing, how are they thinking about things like how might this affect your students in terms of scholarship or being admitted into colleges and universities. And so we're in a learning phase, and we've got some folks who are completely on board and ready to go, and we've got others that are not quite as optimistic, and that's good, and it's good discussion for us to have as a committee, and it'll be good discussion for us to have as a full faculty. There's parts about standards-based grading and learning that seem very sensible, and I like, and there's other parts where I kind of scratch my head and have some questions about, and I need to learn more about that. So.
Have you had a chance to talk to any colleges to see how they will approach their admittance?
Yep.
Admitting and stuff? Yeah,
we've talked to several. That's some folks on our committee have done some work, and I'll be honest, most have said we don't know what you're talking about. We'd be interested in learning more about it. I mean, when you talk to admissions folks, they're just not familiar with that, and it's most all of us probably, certainly the majority of us, all remember how it was when we were in school, and it was that A minus, B plus, B all the way down, and you create a 4.0 scale. I mean, that's what everyone's familiar with, and this is different, and so we are still doing that, correct?
Well, I know, but even Mary Kay's still giving grades, and Jeremy, you're still giving grades. You're still, where grades were given before hasn't changed.
But he's saying he's changed.
There's no pluses and minuses, or pluses and minuses.
And in a true standards base, I don't believe it is, based on just some of the things I've seen. And so for some students, that could maybe help them in terms of a GPA, but others it would hurt. And so there's just, like Mary Kay said, you've done something, we've done something for 125 or 150 years. We don't really think about all the tales that come along and domino effects with every single thing that are done. And so when we make a change, it really creates a lot of ripples throughout the entire system.
So if we went the whole way to a true standard base, there wouldn't be a GPA, or there wouldn't be class ranks or anything like that, would there?
Well, I would say class rank probably doesn't have anything to do with standards based, and that's certainly another movement that people have to kind of move away and from that. But with GPA, and I think it does look different.
You personally working in that realm, you don't want to be the leader and be the one to throw it out, because your students will be compared to all those that do have a GPA and a class rank and an ACT.
And that's,
if you don't give them one will be given to them, and that has financial implications for family when it comes to scholarships.
And that's not to say that I think when we talk about a 4.0 scale, we have to keep in mind that's subjective. I mean, we can make it look as objective as we want, but really that's subjective, because a student who gets an A in this class, we've all had teachers who were harder or who were easier, and when you think about that just within a school, or you think about that within a region of our state and multiple school districts, I mean, a 12-inch ruler might not really be a 12-inch ruler in one district compared to another, or it might be a meter stick or a yardstick. And so that's where things such as maybe an ACT kind of does give a common level of assessment, whether we like it or not.
However, all research says that GPA and class rank are much better indicators of long-term academic success than an ACT.
And that's what most people still look at.
You just got to be cautious.
Yep.
Especially considering the post-secondary scenario for our students and what the ramifications can be for them, and how those post-secondary places are going to view students. And we don't want to be putting our students in
Correct.
a
And
situation where
yep, and I think we also have to understand that maybe that doesn't mean that we're all at each grade level is identical or the same. I mean, I don't know that I want my first grader or second grader to know what his GPA is at Parkside. I don't think that really matters at that level. And I think at our 3-4 it can be a little bit different, or our 5-8 it can be a little bit different. And regardless of what scale, are we preparing our kids for that next step? And
traditionally, wasn't K4 kind of the USS plus? I feel like that, and I know my kids went to Holy, but I'm pretty confident that's what they're up to grade 4. It was USS plus, when you get the little things on behavior and stuff like that. And then 5 through 8 was sort of a bit of a transition into once you got to the high school.
I'll just say it could be, and the thing that I struggle with our current system, and I look at our teachers' grade books, and some people do a great job of breaking down how their classes are categorized. So as a parent or as the principal, I can see exactly how is that student performing. And that in itself really isn't any different than what we saw on any of these other report cards. And then some people, maybe they do it differently and they lump it all together. And so does that really give us the same level of information about what areas are they performing well in and what areas are they struggling in? And that's really kind of what we talk about when we talk about a reporting system. Does it give us good information and feedback so the practitioner knows what areas to help the kids? And so, we have a lot of information in there, and if we take it and we roll it all into one grade, which you all as parents at the high school see on a grade card, how much does that really tell us? Or by breaking it down, does that give us some additional information so we know what areas that our kids and our students are doing well in, and what areas that they need some extra practice or they need to continue to get some skill development in?
I agree with Kurt's comment about being cautious going in the secondary and the high school direction as you look into this. The one thing that repeatedly I hear us talk about is can't let people fall in the cracks. And I think that I've seen in the standard-based learning is they're making sure that each part of it, they know what they're doing. And going to that next grade, that teacher then can see each piece of that, where are they struggling. And I think that's one part that I get concerned about is that one that gets passed to second or third grade that wasn't quite mastering it. How does that teacher the next year know where this at least breaks it down a little bit? Even at the middle school level, I saw teachers, making sure they mastered something before they took the test again. I think that's great. High school, it's a different animal. I agree. I think if they meet their standards and K through 8, they're going to sail through high school. They're going to sail right through college if they pick college because they've learned how to learn. So I like the lower grades.
I do a common thing. Bill and Karen said, and I agree. The ones that do master it, I think there needs to be some discussion of how to keep them engaged beyond what we're doing now.
I think we've talked a lot about these last two slides already kind of throughout, but the benefits that we laid out as we were thinking standards-based learning, the increased knowledge of the standards is for staff and students, everyone just to know what we're teaching. Our grades are reflective of the standards we've talked about. Actively reflects students' skills and knowledge, just that those grades are specific to those different skills. Detailed information regarding student performance, and that's the participation, homework completion, those skills for success pieces that we've always done, just pulling that out as a separate thing, and the more accurate reporting. So those are the benefits we laid out.
The challenges that we're facing, as you can see, change, that's a difficult thing, and this is a big change. It's very institutionalized how we've been doing grading. It doesn't necessarily mean we've been doing it right. So this is challenging for us because it is difficult to deal with change of any kind. And this is kind of a fundamental thing that we've all grown up with, and now we're changing that. And so that's our biggest challenge. Educating our stakeholders, making sure that the parents and the students and our teachers, everybody knows and understands the system, can interpret that system, and when we say meets that standard, they know exactly what that means or doesn't mean or partially means. So that's a big responsibility for us as educators to educate the stakeholders as well. Campus gradebook, and we've talked about that, how having that program meet our needs and our different needs at each level to report out what those grades are. And again, I guess we didn't address this here, but SPED and EL and addressing those students and their particular needs. And if we have students coming into our system that are at different levels than what the general population might be, how do we meet their needs and help them meet the standards? And then again, we've addressed the college entrance and scholarship requirements at the high school level. And so when you say take it lightly, that's why we have committees in place. We're going to continue to research and make recommendations. We're not just going to jump right into it. We're going to see what is the best practice, what's working, what works for our districts before we just headlong into it. Any additional questions?
Thanks for coming. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, it was good. Thank
Thank
all
you.
of you. Appreciate it.
Moving to our consent agenda, I make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
One thing I would point there is in item 8.7, and if you have the ability to open up the document that is included with that, items 8, 9, and 10 in the notice of new contract, those are recommendations to hire EL teachers, one to replace Jamie Brigger, who has moved into one of the new sections, and then the other two positions would be new. You previously authorized the creation of a 1.5 FTE classroom teacher for EL and a 0.5 coordinator. After going through interviews and just really trying to figure out the best direction to go, it would be my recommendation that for this year we make the 2.0 FTEs that are new be all teacher positions and hold off on the halftime coordinator until maybe towards the end of this year. We'll start looking for one for next year. So that would be items 8, 9, and 10, just in a little more detail for you, if that makes sense.
So this way we have EL teachers at all schools on a regular basis.
Yes.
Good. Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. It is approved. Financials.
The treasurer's report, I would just make one comment in regards to the treasurer's report, and if you would open that up to the 3-year comparison, and specifically looking at the revenue side, you'll see that we had, as far as general education funds, 28% in one year, 23% in this last year, and then now at 20%. The reason why there's a difference in regards to that is because we had a payment that typically we received by the end of the month, end of November, that we did not receive until December 1st. So that's the reason for that difference. So that's really the only thing on the treasurer's report that I have to report. And then in regards to the bills, Mr. Chair, if you'd like me to bring those forward.
Sure.
This is for the period November-December. The general fund, $1,659,913.45. The food service fund, $140,217.53. The transportation fund, $148,447.95. The community services fund, $84,278.87. Capital outlay fund, $118,624.21. The construction fund, $66,568.82. And the last fund that I'll share is the student entrepreneurial fund, $748.44. That makes a grand total of $2,218,799.27. And Mr. Chair and fellow board members, I would recommend approval of our claims for the period November-December of 2015.
Thank you. Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Is approved. Board forum. Anybody on the board have anything they'd like to bring up? Okay. MREA board info. Any questions?
Tricia, how would you like this done? Have folks email, since there's only one ballot for the school board portion.
They just want to communicate with Jeff, and Jeff can communicate the overall response with me. Then I will submit the official ballot.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I've gotten one from Dion already, so you're way ahead of us, Dion.
Overachiever.
Is it a write-in vote for himself? Or?
Reminder the Maytag graduation. It's always nice that we can make that. That's always very important.
And it's December 23rd at 11 a.m.
Okay. Administrator's report, quick highlight.
I think what I'll do this month is reports are included and attached. I certainly can answer any questions that you have on any of the reports. One of the, we've asked Jackie Buden, our Assistant Director of Special Education, to begin to submit a report. Obviously, she is involved in about, directly or indirectly, about probably 15 to 17% of our student population, and has a lot of different things going on, so we felt like it would be beneficial for her to share what's happening in the area of special education, which she did this month, and I believe she shared some information about an early childhood grant or program that our staff is involved in, and also some monitoring and compliance information in addition to a couple other things. So if you have questions on anything specific, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
Any questions?
I have a couple of questions. At Westside, they did a United Way. You're probably familiar with this.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they did something more specific to their building, set a goal, that kind of thing. Do we know, do our other buildings try to do that? Is that something we can try and duplicate? We're looking into that a little bit. It seems like they had a lot of success.
Yes, they did. And that was impetus from, I think, their site leadership team and their principal, and got that going. So congratulations to Westside. We'll certainly try to maybe replicate something like that for our next year's drive.
And then, Michelle, I had a question for you. You implemented Michelle at ATEC, which I thought was outstanding, so congratulations. But is that something that can be brought forward to other buildings? I don't know. So maybe we're already doing
Don't
something.
they do a backpack thing?
Okay, so that's fourth, up through fourth.
So we're just missing middle school.
Mary Kay, do you guys do anything similar to what they tried it or doing it? Yeah.
Food shelf.
We do the canned food fundraiser every year. Over £1,000. We don't go to that location, but we go out here at this location.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing, I think you actually have stuff there that students can take, right? And you're probably not doing that. Very good.
We don't actually go to the food shelf. Our student council does a piece of that, and then in addition to that part, we do the Food for Kids fundraiser with the Rotary.
He's talking about like if you have a food bank for the kids, so when they're leaving here, like for the weekends. Okay.
The community Food for Kids, I believe, go to fourth grade.
Yep.
And that's all I was asking, is that something that can be something that team could discuss and see if there's any benefits? I thought that was awesome.
Very good. Moving on to our school board reports. Do you have any reports for us?
Yeah, we did. It was Jackson week, so boys basketball beat Jackson, so did the girls basketball team.
Always good to be Jacksons.
Yes. And then Link Crew had Coco and Crammon for the freshmen, where they all get to hang out and sit in the cafeteria, work on their homework, bond with their Link Crew leaders and other peers, which was a good night. And then FFA raised $17,000 in. Wait, is that dollars? Okay, sorry, $17,000 in fruit sales.
Our Business Professionals of America, one of their members got awarded the Minnesota Member of the Month. So that was pretty fun for the club. And then robotics starts up on January 9th. They'll figure out their challenge for the year and have 6 weeks to build their robots. Junior High Knowledge Bowl had regionals last Friday, and one of the teams got third place, and they'll be moving on to regionals in a few weeks. And the high school band, choir, and orchestra held their madrigal dinner last weekend, or 2 weeks ago.
Very good. Thank you. Facilities update.
Yeah, I got the wrong agenda. We, Facilities Committee met last week and discussed a variety of things, including just taking a look at what we call a process map, and which is still in draft format right now. Bruce and Tricia and I had a conference call today with our consultants, I guess, from financial advisors from Ellers, where they looked at the process map as well and offered a couple of suggestions that will help us to continue to tweak that. I think we're almost at a point where we can finalize it and get it out, so we have our sort of our checklist of things that absolutely need to happen by certain deadlines, things that will happen even though there aren't necessarily deadlines, and things that can or should happen. And that process map will definitely, I think, be helpful as we go forward towards the May 10th building bond referendum and making sure that our informational and educational efforts are good and that we're doing what we need to do from a legal perspective. ATS&R has finished their meetings, gathering input from our staff members by building, at times by grade level, and at times by department, and has taken that input and I think refined the plans, the concepts, if you will, at Parkside, the middle school, the proposed new elementary school, and the high school. They have more specific information now, and we're trying to schedule a facilities committee meeting early in January to have them come out and present that and talk about costs and next steps. We're also looking at our financing options for the building bond referendum, which will have an impact on the tax implications, tax impact for property owners. So that's something we need to continue to work on. But in general, I think things are moving forward and progressing relatively well.
Good. MSBA Delegate Assembly. Everybody signed up?
No, that's for
different.
This is different.
Oh, go ahead, Dion.
Did you want to sign up? There's an opening.
No, I'm not signing up.
Just wanted to share my experience with the Delegate Assembly Conference that was a couple weeks ago. It was a really good experience. A little background on the Delegate Assembly. MSBA bylaws maps the state into 30 different areas. 3 delegates are assigned to each area for the first 12,500 students that you have, and then you're allowed an additional delegate for each 12,500 students that you have in addition to that. Marshall Public Schools is in Area 8, and we have 3 seats. Only 2 of them are filled. It's a 2-year term, and there's only 2 meetings you go to. One is the pre-delegate assembly, which they go over the resolutions in detail, so if you have questions, and then the next meeting is the Delegate Assembly Conference in December, which you vote on the different resolutions. This year there were 20 resolutions that were brought forward, and these are brought forward by school boards, individual school board members, and MSBA Board of Directors. Then the resolutions that receive majority votes become the basis for MSBA staff lobbying efforts on behalf of the school boards across the state. This year, there were 20 resolutions, 14 of them passed. I won't go over all of them, but there are just a few of them that I wanted to talk about, highlight, because I know that they've been brought up before. Resolution 1, these are all on that attachment, but Resolution 1 was the requirement for an expansion of early education. This resolution states that if there is an expansion on the early education program, that we ask legislature to enable a flexibility in the implementation, structure, staffing, and timing, as well as setting aside adequate resources for additional age-appropriate classroom and fully funded the transportation costs. This resolution passed 93-4, and there was a lot of discussion on this one, but a lot of the districts shared the same concerns that we've had. Resolution 6 was the expansion use of long-term facility maintenance revenue. This resolution was submitted by the MSBA Board of Directors because this issue was brought up throughout the MSBA advocacy tour that was throughout the state. This resolution asks for the expansion of allowable use that could be used, including facility security, lease purchase agreements, purchase of portable classrooms, or technology infrastructure. This vote passed 111-6. Resolution number 9, agriculture property tax inequity. This resolution urges legislature to provide leadership in addressing the issue of school bond referendums and provide a solution that will support a more equitable approach in reference to agriculture taxes. This referendum also asks to reduce the tax burden on agricultural land, but at the same time protecting commercial and residential property taxes from a tax shift. This passed 100-11. The last one was resolution number 17, concurrent enrollment. This resolution asked legislation to engage in discussion with the Higher Learning Commission to explore alternative approaches to the current HLC policy related to high school CIS instructors and provide financial assistance to help in the effort of the policy. This one passed 92 to 11. Like I said, there were 20 resolutions, and if you have any questions on any of the other ones, I'm sure happy to answer them for you. But like I said, it was a great experience. There was a lot of discussions on a lot of the resolutions. It was nice to hear the different sides from a lot of the different districts.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, very good.
So, Dion, these roll forward now to the MSBA board and appropriate committees, and based off of this, the input from the delegate assembly, the legislative priorities are organized, for lack of a better term, correct?
Correct. And I did ask, the majority of the time they'll go with the wording that was approved. This isn't set in stone. These are resolutions that go to legislature that they can then, and with, school board's opinions on them, can reword it. But yeah, this goes from MSBA to the legislature as things that it's a little stronger because, they received a majority of the votes.
Were there 111 districts there, or roughly that number, or were those board members from 20 districts, or how did that work?
There was, I believe there was 117 voters.
Okay.
Some districts had multiple.
Okay.
You got up to the metro area, there was, like Minneapolis, St. Paul had a few. I think Elberly, Rochester had a couple on theirs.
I thought it was really interesting just going through these when you and I had communicated a little bit via email about these resolutions ahead of time and then afterwards to see how the votes went. But, I mean, everything in here in one way or another probably does apply to our district, certainly, and like you and I had talked about, some are more prevalent or relevant maybe in Marshall than they might be in, I don't know, somewhere up north that doesn't have the same type of composition of land or whatever. But thanks for highlighting the ag property tax relief. I know that's a big focus for MREA, and it sounds like now it'll be a focus for MSBA as well.
Well, and the support behind that too was, overwhelming, even with the metro area.
Good. Thanks, Dion.
Yep.
Any discussion on the readings of 801, 802, 805, 806, 807, and 8789 readings? I'm trying.
She messed you up. She didn't put them in order.
You didn't put them in order.
I cleaned them too. So.
I'm sure you've looked through all of them very thoroughly. Just take a second look at the 789 meal charge policy,
That's
which
one
has
that we're
been
gonna...
reworked, that Mark and the folks from Tahoe referred to, because there's been a lot of input on that. So please take a look.
I think we'll be having a work session on the meal policy anyway for next year. Okay. Any other discussion on that? Moving on to our action items. Authorization to certify the 2015-16 levy. Motion to approve. Need a second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? I'll call a vote. Is approved. 2014-15 Flexible Learning Year Report. Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Just you'll note that it's year 2 or year 5, depending on how you look at it, of our involvement in the second 3-year cycle of the Flexible Learning Year. The report is a required component of the Flexible Learning Year Consortium, and really gives an update on the 4 areas of the FLY, including student achievement, professional development, teacher induction, and PLCs.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll call a vote. Is approved. Approval of the 2015-16 calendar adjustment. Do we have a motion?
I'll move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Open for discussion.
So I can answer questions if you have, but this is really the result of there being a November 31st in our original calendar, which unfortunately November only has 30 days. So we need to do something to kind of line that back up the way it needs to be. We did talk about a variety of different options and what we might do, and ultimately it seemed like the consensus, and it certainly wasn't unanimous, but the consensus would be to bring our staff back on May 23rd for a professional development day. We would likely do something with goals for 2016-17. We may also discuss site continuous improvement plans for this year, maybe do some strategic planning type things. And one of the things that probably I didn't include this in there, and it was brought up later, and I think it's a very valid idea that perhaps we want to look at, and I don't know what your feedback would be on this, but a Saturday option in addition to making up the day on May 23rd, which is a Monday. Honestly, I'm not real keen on the Saturday option because it's not a day they're going to have to do their own thing. We're going to have structured activities. So if that's something you feel strongly about, you can add that to the recommendation. But my recommendation is to leave it at May 23rd, and we'll make the most valuable use of that time that we can.
So if people have vacation planned or something, then they just need to figure that out with you.
Visit with the building principal, and we can have conversations about that. Yeah.
And did you say you were just throwing out about that Saturday? What did you say about Saturday before that Monday?
Yep.
Graduation. So,
yeah.
Plus, you incur overtime with some of our folks that we had open building.
Could be some implications for that.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. It's approved. Approval of the rate increase for the Marshall Area Child Care Center. Do we have a motion?
I'll move.
And do we have a second? I'll second. Open for discussion. Hearing no discussion, we'll vote. Is approved. Authorization to sell surplus technology parts. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
And I'll second. Open for discussion.
This is per our district policy. We're following that format.
Very good.
But it will be a fairly substantial number, we hope.
Very good. Call a vote. Is approved. Approval of our school board goals for 2015-16. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Open for discussion.
The goals that you previously approved, I believe it was in September or October, included providing adequate and safe facilities and also promoting the welfare of the district and all children through the political process at the local, state, and national level. At the previous school board meeting, you had an opportunity to kind of reflect and weigh in on the action items relevant to each of those two goals. So this is just a follow-up to the previous meeting in December and approval of the action items. And if they are approved, we'll move forward with them.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. It is approved. Anything else? We could drive my wife nuts and stay here longer if we want to.
Oh, Pat's probably hanging out with her right now.
Meeting's over. Thank you.